I've been experimenting with, which is working with the powers of the night, working with darkness and night. The moonlight's incorporated into that, and I've been finding it very effective. Um, so the other night, it was a Saturday night. It was really cold, and this was actually almost 2 weeks ago. There was a moon out and it was shining, and I decided to take my bike and ride down to this area called the Greenway in my town, which is a pathway that follows along a creek for quite a ways, and then when the creek meets the river, which is called the Tar River, the pathway turns and follows the river. So when I got there, I started riding down the pathway, which goes down for a long ways as it heads towards the river, and there's very large trees on each side and woods and swamp, and it was really dark. So I was riding down there and I couldn't see very far ahead of me, and it was misty too. So it got to the point where I stopped riding and got off my bike and walked it, so that I didn't run into an animal, or sometimes the pathway gets flooded over and I didn't want to ride into the water because it was pretty cold. So I just started walking, and there was a little bit of flooding over the pathway, but it was just barely covering the pathway. So I just walked right through it, and that was the only point where there was any flooding at all. So that wasn't a problem. It was really dark, and there was a couple of concerns that I had when thinking about embarking on this little journey. One thought was, what if I get mugged? And another one was like, what if I scare up an animal and it attacks me? Because there are some bears in our area, not a whole lot, but there are some. But I've also heard that if you scare a deer bad enough, that it might attack you. So usually they just run off, but I have heard of cases of people being attacked by deers, and it doesn't sound like very much fun. So I had those concerns in my mind. But as I was going down there, I thought about how part of the work of building yourself up, building up your personal power, building up your confidence has to do with facing down your fears. So this was a point where I was definitely nervous about doing something, and I went ahead and did it, and it turned out great. Let me just tell you more about it. So there was that aspect of facing down fears and developing more personal power through that. As I went down, when I came to the point where the stream meets the river and the path turns, I felt more of a sense of calm, and also the mist kind of cleared, so everything was a bit clearer, and more moonlight was able to come down through the tree tops down to where I was, so I could see better. And I was walking along, and it was really beautiful. There's this one part where there's a pond on the left-hand side of the path, and the moonlight was shining down on it, and it was just beautiful. And then I got to where I wanted to go, to a place that accesses the river. So I walked down on this little beach, and there was the river, and at nighttime, and it was also really beautiful. So what I had come out there to do on that point of this journey was to get rid of some old wounds from a past relationship. So what I did was I knelt down by the water and put my fingers in the water, and immediately when I put my fingers in the water, it felt so good. I thought it would be cold, and it was cold, but not that cold, but it felt very refreshing just on my fingertips, and it seemed to refresh my entire body and spirit very deeply. So then I just communed with the water a little bit, and then I asked the water to take these old wounds from me and let them wash downstream and become part of the earth, where they'd compost, and maybe something beautiful would come up from it, from the composting and having it work in with the earth and decompose, making the earth rich so that beautiful things can come up from it. So I felt those I thought about those wounds and the times that they were made in, and I just let it pass through me into the water, and it was a very healing thing. It felt very relieving and cleansing. So I just stayed like that for a little bit with my fingers in the water, and then I got up when I felt cleansed, and I had to take a leak really bad, and I think that was water telling me to get rid of the rest of the residue that was in me from these wounds. So I went up in the trees a little bit and took a leak away from the river. I didn't want to pee in the river, so I'm sure a lot of people would, but I just didn't want to do that, so I didn't. And that was it for that part of my journey. And then when I was leaving, a heron on the other side of the river took off with the kind of noise that they make. It's very distinct. If you're not familiar with a heron, it's a very large water bird with a really long, thin neck. But it took off and went upstream, and I took that to mean just like a spiritual sign that the river had received my wounds, and that the working had went how I wanted it to, and it was over with. So I put it behind me and walked back out. Now, close to this pathway is also a graveyard that I really like. It has some very old gravestones in it and very new ones. I think probably my favorite part about the graveyard is this huge live oak tree that's in the center of it. Now, this tree is massive. If I put my arms around it like this, that just covers maybe a fifth of the trunk. I mean, it is huge, and some of the limbs that come off of it are as large as trees themselves. I can't wrap my arms around some of the limbs that come off of it. It's a huge tree, and it has places around it on the ground where its roots kind of come up, and there's holes in it that go down into the earth, and that is just so cool to me. So I consider that tree to be my personal world tree, and I meditate there a lot. So there's a newer grave there of a person that died recently of cancer. The way that I found her grave was one time in the daytime, like a month or so earlier than when this happened. I noticed that she still had her Halloween decorations up around her gravestone, and that was around Christmas time, so I was thinking that she must have really loved Halloween, because her family hadn't taken those decorations down and replaced them with the Christmas decorations. Um, as far as I know, her Halloween decorations are still up now, and she has a witch as one of her Halloween decorations. It's like stuck in the ground with a metal pole, and then it's a witch. So I thought that was interesting, and I was drawn to it, and I sat there and meditated for a while and just kind of communed with her. And then on this night I came back and tried to communicate with her more. And I did get some short little messages from her that came kind of in the form of thoughts in my mind, but they were in her voice, and they were just short little messages that were almost barely perceptible in my mind, but I was just really listening, and I could hear them. And she told me that she was at peace, and that she did love Halloween and little things like that. So I enjoyed that communication with her. And then I looked up, and there were all these deer about 50 yards away from me, and I always, whenever I see deer out in the wild, it's like looking into another world, because their world is out in the wild, whereas we live more in the human society, with our shops and businesses and our working and all this other cars and whatnot, but they live purely from nature. So it's kind of for me, it's a spiritual type of a incident when I run into deer and see them. And there were a lot of them. There were at least 12 of them that I could see, and I could just see their silhouettes, but they were looking at me and kind of looking at each other and nibbling at the ground and things like that. So I just basically left them alone and rode over to my world tree and meditated while sitting on its roots for a while, and that was really cleansing too. And I always see the world tree as with its branches going up and reaching the stars, and its roots going down deep into the darkness of the earth. And that's how it was at nighttime. So it was really meaningful, and the whole night was very powerful to me. And there's also another grave of a girl that had been killed by actually being hit in the face with a baseball. That's really close to my world tree, and I went and sat with her for a little while, and she gave me the same type of short little messages, that she was at peace and that she was also enjoying the night, and her father had recently died, and he was there with her, just like 10 feet from her. So, and that she was at peace with that, and he was at peace, and they were happy together. So that's really the main extent of this night, and what I call my night walking, or my night workings. And since then I've done one other night walking where I went out and did some workings, and I just find it very powerful, and I wanted to share it with you. Just maybe you can find the same type of magical power from doing workings out at nighttime. I'm sure you probably do, but if you want to share any of those night workings with me, I'd really be interested in hearing about it. Having troubles talking now. Um, but I guess that's it. I hope you all have a good day. Namaste.